Alright everybody, you may have noticed that in yesterday's video, there was a couple things. First of all, yesterday's video was quite long, as a matter of fact, and there was a certain part of the information that was left out for Global, which was to do with this character, Rain. And some people have thought it's a mistake, and no. It's just yesterday there was other stuff to talk about. I really wanted to focus on Luel and Silma. I did not want to detract from that with this other piece of news, and I think this other piece of news is interesting for different reasons. As you know, not too long ago, I'm going to say last week, and then I realized that I think it was more than a week, but, not too long ago, Rain EX came out on the JP side, and my review of him got a little bit of pushback from people. Some people were not happy with the fact that I was not overly as impressed with Rain as they were in terms of him getting his EX and upgraded levels and therefore making him better. But now he's essentially coming to Global approximately 3 months earlier, and some people have questioned why. And I'm here to talk about that today. I'm here to talk about whether or not he is really worth your EX material, because in all honesty, EX material, unless you're spending money, unless you are going in on some of the game's heals per se, EX material isn't the easiest to come by, and with a lot of high-profile units coming in the future, it's hard to discern for some people on whether or not you should get specific characters or not specific characters. So let's get into it. Rain and his EX. First of all, let's talk about Rain. Rain is a character from Final Fantasy Brave Exvius, a game that came out roughly about 5.5 years ago, and is produced by Alum/Gumi, and has both a JP, a global version, and a Chinese version, and he is essentially a crossover character into Wotv. His game is very much Brave Exvius, but he has been kind of partnered because the two games are brother and sister. Now, I'm sure that a lot of viewers already know that, but let's get all the basic info out of the way right now. Now, Rain is a fire-based character in this game and is essentially more or less a magic tank. He is a character with hate generation in his kit. He has debuffs, he has some chaining, and most of him is primarily focused in and around dealing magic-based damage. To the sense of, basically his kit is designed to end up doing magic damage and really protecting other characters from taking large amounts of magical-based damage. And really, I think that Rain, as when he was introduced to the game, was a really good magic tank. There wasn't a ton of other options out there, and since then, I think he's just been really solid. A lot of globalers apparently like to use him as a pretty reliable chainer, and elemental chaining is pretty king in this game. It is a really good way of dishing out a large amount of damage and clearing multiple pieces of content, such as raids, or trial-based event, bosses, hard difficulty. There's just a lot of stuff so really, what happened? What happened on the JP side that essentially may have made him less than super exciting for a lot of other players? Well, you have to remember that JP is essentially 3 months ahead, and 3 months ahead in terms of the mage meta right now is pretty substantial. We'd be remiss to not talk about a lot of different units that are going to come into play, but really focusing around Rain's 3 primary tasks, I think, are where you really need to look at him in terms of what he is capable of doing and what he is not as strong at, for where the JP side is at. So first of all, let's define what those 3 things are. First of all, status effects. With Rain's EX, he has a new status effect that a lot of people have deemed quite good, and I have to agree with that. Second is in terms of DPS. How much damage is he capable of putting out? And the third and final one is chaining, which is a totally valid thing to talk about again. Chaining is a large source of damage in this game, and elemental chaining is even better. Elemental chaining is so important, it's usually a mission on a lot of quests to get rewards and everything. So I don't think elemental chaining should ever be forgotten about. Now let's take a look at what he gets in his brand new X. As you can see, I've basically gotten mine to a level 107 because I think that is essentially, for the most part, where I think his strongest acquisitions are. Again, not saying, not to badmouth a character. Again, I think that he has a lot of good stuff in his kit that is worth talking about. It's just that some of it doesn't quite measure up. All right, so taking a look, first of all, is his Firaga upgrade. And Firaga here is, I would argue, one of his biggest, if not the biggest, mainly because it slots into now being an instant cast ability. Removing casting time is very good because essentially it's much more effective, but it also gains the slow status effect on it, which is, well, needless to say, should not be underestimated. Slow status effect is still, can be, quite often used on bosses, or at least some form of time steal, and that is important to note. But the slow status effect is a very, very powerful ability, or a powerful status effect, and it was used in the Final Fantasy VII event to great length by me against the Guard Scorpion. Made that fight much more audible and much more manageable, so I think that is a very remember going forward. Secondly is a support upgrade, which gives him essentially AoE resistance on his spirit stat. You're always going to be running his spirit stat because that's the primary function, is to essentially be a magic tank, and so AoE resistance is just really nice for him. Makes it much more survivable. Now his new ability is the one that I kind of question the most, just because it feels a little bit, maybe counterintuitive, maybe not quite as good. But with no casting at time, it is still fairly decent. 175% modifier on it, which is comparable to some of his other damage abilities. Decreases movement for 1 turn for 3 turn targets that are affected by this. Again, it's not necessarily bad. I just don't think it makes quite as much sense, and I don't think it's quite as good. But looking at the other stats, he gets a lot of the stuff that you would want to see. Dexterity, magic, HP, a little bit of speed even to make him comparable. So there you go. That's essentially looking into Rain's EX and why it is good and why I think it is partially flawed. Now we're going to take a look in the 3 aspects of Rain's EX to whether or not it's even worth talking about or even worth considering. Let's talk first of all about tanking. Tanking is a very easy one to talk about as compared to where he is on global versus where he is on JP, and we're going to start with the specific unit that I think is worth bringing up, which is this girl, Charlotte. Another character from Brave Exvius that has been brought into this game as kind of a collaboration crossover character, who is a thunder-based elemental UR magic tank. And for all intents and purposes, she is an incredible magic tank for a lot of different reasons. Her stats are generally better. She has a primary new job, I would argue. Also, okay, popularity is like, you're going to like the characters you like, but from my days in Brave Exvius, I remember her being fairly more popular than Rain was, but in terms of Rain's popularity, I felt like it always came back to Rain versus Laswell. Which one do you like better? That's kind of the one that you side with a little bit better. Both have had so many versions at this point that it isn't really worth talking to about. But taking a look at what makes Charlotte special is worth talking about. She essentially has better stats, she is faster, and she has better movement than. All of these things are generally important, but she also comes equipped with the Monk sub-job as well as Thief. Thief giving her more speed options, and not only that, but the option of time steal. Another, speed affecting for bosses that is really, really valuable. And that essentially means that she can kind of pull double duty. But one of the other things that is incredibly valuable about Charlotte that has put her into a higher place on the JP side than Rain as a magic tank, other than stats and a hit, the fact that she can kind of essentially counter ability. She has more protection against debuffs. She has, but I think that the counter decrease is an incredibly high tier ability, because some of the counters that have since existed in the JP side are just so damn strong. You look at particularly, just the classic example that anyone on the global side I feel like can, which is Yuna. Yuna's counter ability is so damn strong that if she didn't have that, I don't think we'd ever consider Yuna as dangerous as she really is, currently. And I think that, having an ability to shut down other people's counter abilities is not only valuable right now, but it's valuable in the future. You look at, old counters like Reflex, which are still very, very powerful, and versus newer ones like Yuna's or Black Witch Helena, who is a unit we're just about to talk about. Shutting down counters is a really valuable ability for a unit that is essentially an anti-personnel and anti-damn unit. If you were to take Charlotte's main piece of content, which was the Leviathan fight, Leviathan had such a regular counter ability that it really sold the idea that Charlotte does have a particularly strong place against other enemies, both in PvP and PvP content, and that those newer features are incredibly valuable. But turnover and counterpoint, the other side of the magic tank point, is to deal with damage dealing. And damage dealing on the JP side for mages right now is pretty night and day different from what Global is, because Global has not experienced the power creep, which is Black Witch Helena, a unit so regular now in PvP that I'm not entirely sure that everyone in the game wasn't given her as a gift, whereas I had to get mine from the gacha. Joking, but also kind of true. Simple fact is that Black Witch Helena is an incredibly OP tier mage unit that has no height restrictions because of Calculator or Arithmetician, depending on how you call it. She also has access to Spellblade, but her main job has AP Drain. It has, bypassing resistances. It is bypassing Spirit. She really is a next tier mage that almost no one in the game, if Yuna didn't exist with her counter already, I would say that there is no other unit in the game as powerful as Black Witch Helena, and she currently exists in one of the strongest elements with some of the best vision cards. Really, I'd say that Black Witch Helena is just such a high tier DPS that units such as Rain that really don't bring anything new to the game don't stand as great of a chance. But there's also the equipment aspect too. Spawning over here for a second, just to look specifically, and yes, right now everything cool, so get magical here. There are some new pieces of equipment on the JP side that help mages deal with both AP cost as well as just piercing magic resistance. And that essentially means that tanks have a more difficult time. It's not to say that there isn't that kind of, good option, or there isn't, still very strong tanks, as we're about to also talk about. It's just that, magic DPS has taken quite a big upturn recently, including also the brand new version of Glassy, which is a fire elemental mage, which is also incredibly high tier. Both of the mage units, now if we're talking about anti-magic tanks, you really need to bring something extra to the game that can potentially, do more than just countering them with DPS. Rain's a fine DPS. As a matter of fact, I'd say he's actually really good just because he has elemental chaining in his kit. But really, that's talking more about the DPS section, and talking about the magic tank section. Charlotte's just more new and updated, and Rain came out after her after people had gotten excited for Charlotte. There was a genuine eagerness and excitement for Charlotte when she came to the game. Even with FF7 coming in, that really tells you something about how good the character is. But continuing on, there was also something that came before, which is Warrior of Light. Warrior of Light's EX is arguably stronger because he can be a much better physical tank at some times, but a magical tank at other times. And Warrior of Light's EX is just so incredibly strong that you had, in terms of a magic tank, someone who didn't really bring anything new, really anything incredibly new, but also something like that didn't really excel and could be as flexible. The Warrior of Light got more points for that, and Charlotte got more points for being newer, and Rain kind of ended up in this weird middle ground where there was already an incredibly high amount of power in the mage category, so Rain just didn't quite add up on the JP side, and that's generally why my excitement wasn't super high for him. I still don't think he competes as well as some of the other ones, even with his improvement. But again, that's just to say that, and Rain is still, we'll talk more about what he is on global, but I'm sure there's so many things to talk about, and this video is running a little bit long, so I do want to get on to the other points. Let's talk about his slow aspect, or should I say his slow status effect. And this was essentially the thing that I feel like a lot of the problem came from about how exciting his Firaga truly was, because, not getting into the DPS element, but just in terms of slow status effect, Ramure was a character who was essentially, the first copy was free. You could get her to LB3 very easily, and LB4 potentially, also easy if you were spending even a tiny amount of resources on her. But this is a primary time mage that has UR stats that also features a Hastega, ability in her kit, which is just so much more valuable. And again, taking a look really into why this character was just so highly valued. Again, another dark elemental mage character that could slot in incredibly well in supporting Duan, character who turns out with a speed buff is incredibly deadly, but also the fact that she could synergize very well with another dark elemental mage that we've already talked about, Black Witch Helena. Really, Ramure just kind of already did the thing Rain did, but just already pretty well enough, and people had already invested before Rain's EX had even come out. So to that extent, Ramure just kind of already was doing something, but doing more time magey stuff better. People had already invested, and I'm sorry to say this, but Ramure is cuter than Rain. So moving on, yeah, I just have to say that in most aspects, in terms of a status effect, Rain just didn't bring as much to the table in terms of time element, time mage, and support. Now, moving on to DPS, that's not to say that Rain is totally invaluable. He obviously has chaining. It's very powerful. It is a triple hit ability in the fire element that provides even good sword chaining. Like, I have recently used him on the JP side, chaining with Cloud and Laswell, and to that extent, it works very well. But if we're looking at DPS, let's face it, Rain doesn't really measure up for a couple of reasons, and it makes it very difficult for me to recommend as a YouTuber slash reviewer because of a couple of reasons. First of all, his UR piece of equipment, which at least on the JP side, not knowing if there's anything special that forgotten about on the global side. Sorry, globalers, I don't have a global account right now, and it's just one of those things where there's just a few too many differences to remember at this point. Maybe Rain on the global side, and I'm sure the comments can help me out with this, has it as an easily accessible way to get this piece of equipment, but on the JP side, he does not. And that's a problem because essentially his equipment is incredibly specialized for him. That's very good because it essentially gives him a really strong piece of equipment that's it, but it also means that for players who got here to the game late, this is not the easiest piece of equipment, and Porcelain Tower is kind of on this weird cycle of never showing up for long stretches of time. So I do think that is a problem with his DPS, but I also think that the fire element in general is a problem. Yes, I know Seymour exists. Yes, I know Lord Mont exists. Yes, I know Globalers have done really well with the current raid with just those two units. I've seen the footage. That's not my problem. My problem is that overall the fire element as a whole feels still kind of weak. With the new global card that you guys are getting, I'm sure that it will be a higher evaluation than what I could give on the JP side. But in terms of Rain's overall evaluation on the JP side, it's just simple as this. As a magic tank, he was slotted between two really high, two essentially better units came along before his EX did. Both Warrior of Light getting his EX and Charlotte being newer with some new features and a generally newer kit that kind of worked better. So that for that reason, Rain on the JP side didn't seem as exciting. Second, in terms of time magic, sorry, but Ramir was just fits so well with the Dark Element team, the whole mono element thing, and is just so good with Duan that I don't think it's much of a comparison there. And in terms of DPS, I mean, Black Witch Helena exists as both a counter to him and as in terms of a DPS source. And there are just so many good options right now on JP. There's new Glassy. There's a ton of Final Fantasy VII units. There's so many good options for elemental chaining in different elements that are much better. Wind with Tifa, lightning with Cloud and 9S, and darkness with just a ton of shit. Like, in all honesty, and this brings me to the ultimate end point of the video. Rain in global. How do I think he will perform? Dramatic glasses. I think that Rain will be a much better unit on global and a much more tempting offer for people to end up building. There are people who use him as chaining, and for that reason alone, an EX with extra stats is just advantageous. Taking a look at his abilities getting improved and a brand new ability is never a bad thing for any unit in this game. More options is always better. But the new Global Vision card that essentially focuses on him and improving the fire element is kind of a big deal for improving that. But globalers do have to remember that EX materials are pretty limited, especially for free-to-players, and you have to ask yourself whether Rain is worth the investment or if you'd like to try for newer unit. You don't even have to EX Rain right now. There really isn't content geared towards him in the near future. Again, quoting the Leviathan raid, he will just underperform in that because it just so happens it's a strong magic DPS who counters a lot, and Rain is just not the right element for it, and Charlotte is. It puts him in a weird spot, and it's not great. Does that mean that Rain won't see benefits and be stronger in content? Absolutely, and him coming out earlier on Global with a new Vision card just puts him in a better place for people to get more value and use out of him. So by all means, globalers, I think if there was a time to do it, now is potentially the time, and him coming earlier is just better because he'll be more useful now and it faces less competition and seems therefore like a better option. But all the future stuff is still coming. Ramir is still coming. Black Witch Helena is coming very soon. Warrior of Light's EX is coming, and there are lots of people who are excited about that on Global. I think he is like a super popular character. Lots of people have him. If not 99, just have him, period. And his repeat event is coming to Global in the next month? Next month? I think it's like 1 month. I think it's like after Black Witch Helena. But still, there's so much stuff coming, and I've detailed it a fair amount. So his Rain's EX early is definitely to fit better in with a schedule that kind of suits, I think, him a little bit more, where he's not just buried between so much high-profile releases. Is he good? Yes. Is all of his increases good? Yes. Do they all benefit him? Yes. Is he potentially outclassed by stuff that's coming in the future? Obviously. That's any gacha game ever. Newer stuff will have better, will just be better. Otherwise, we would never go for any of them. So yeah, I think that this is a good move for Global to put an EX that is potentially a little bit just buried by just the overwhelming new content in a better spot, and Globalers seem to be quite hyped about him, so great news for you guys. So yeah, that's my overall thoughts on the whole matter. I think it's generally good, and it'll be interesting to see which of you do go for him and which of you won't. But remember, There's a lot of good stuff coming in the future, and EX material is in a relatively short supply if you are not spending on it. So spend wisely. Thanks for watching, take care, and see you next. Maybe talk with your friends, guildmate. You're all going in on rain. It'd be one big rain party. I guess at a rain party you do a rain dance. Okay, there's a bad pun. See ya!